In the dusty stillness of an Arizona summer, where heat shimmered above the earth like a restless spirit and loneliness clung to the desert wind, lived a quiet rancher named Thomas Hale, a man who preferred the soft conversation of horses over the noise of towns, and who carried the weight of his past like stones in his pockets, heavy but hidden from sight. Yet on one unusually scorching afternoon, when the sun burned mercilessly across an empty horizon, Thomas spotted something that made him rub his eyes as if the heat itself had conjured a mirage, for stumbling down his road was a young Apache girl, no older than 14, her lips cracked, her steps weak, her braided hair dusty, and her small hands trembling as she clutched her empty water skin. And though Thomas knew the world frowned upon mingling with the tribes, though he knew whispers in town spoke with suspicion, fear, and prejudice, his heart, shaped by a mother who taught him that a thirsty person is every man's responsibility, pulled him forward before his mind could protest. He approached her slowly, knowing the Apache were wary of white settlers, and offered his canteen with gentle hands, watching as her dark eyes flickered with confusion, fear, and finally desperate hope. And when she drank, gulping like someone reclaiming life itself, Thomas felt something deep inside him shift, as if kindness were awakening a part of him he thought the world had hardened. So he invited her to his porch for shade, gave her bread, wrapped her sore feet, and spoke softly though she barely understood his words. Yet kindness has its own language, and she recognized it immediately. When she finally rose to leave, she placed her hand over her heart, a gesture of gratitude, and walked away toward the red cliffs without a sound, leaving Thomas with the peculiar feeling that something greater than a simple encounter had occurred. Though he couldn't explain it, exhausted from ranch work and lulled by the desert's quiet, Thomas went to bed that night thinking only that he had helped a child in need, unaware that his life was about to change in ways he could never have predicted. Just before dawn, he awoke to a deep rumbling outside, like distant thunder but steady and controlled, and when he stepped to the window, his breath caught in his throat, for stretching across the entire valley, filling the landscape like a moving tide, were Apache warriors, hundreds of them, silent, proud, mounted on strong horses, their spears glinting in the early light, their faces painted for war, their presence unmistakably powerful. And at his doorstep stood 3 chiefs, their expressions unreadable. Thomas's heart pounded like a drum inside his ribs, every story he had ever heard about raids or vengeance rushing through his mind, and he wished only that he had time to write a goodbye letter to his sister in Texas. But before fear could swallow him whole, the smallest of the warriors stepped forward. It was the same young girl, her face no longer tired and wilted, but confident, adorned with ceremonial paint, and wearing a pendant of turquoise and bone that marked her as someone important. And Thomas realized with stunned clarity that she had been no wanderer, no lost child, but the daughter of a respected Apache chief. She spoke softly in her language, and though Thomas couldn't understand, her father translated in perfect English, telling Thomas that the girl had become separated from her hunting party the previous day, dehydrated and near collapse, and had stumbled upon his ranch by what they believed might have been spiritual guidance. The chief explained that the Apache do not forget kindness, especially when shown to their children, and that Thomas's simple gift of water had been seen as an act of courage and honor, for many settlers would have turned her away or worse, but he had chosen compassion over prejudice, risking his safety without expectation of reward, and for that, the entire tribe had come not in anger but in respect. Thomas, speechless, tried to wave off their gratitude, insisting it had been nothing more than what any decent man should do, but the chief shook his head and said that decency was rare in a world divided by fear, and that the measure of a man was not in the lines he carved in the earth but in the bridges he chose to build. Then, in a moment that took Thomas completely off guard, the warriors dismounted and placed offerings at his feet, blankets woven with generations of tradition, baskets of mesquite flower, painted shields, carved totems, a stallion with a coat like polished obsidian, and finally a ceremonial spear, not as a weapon but as a symbol of alliance. The chief declared Thomas Hale friend of the people, a title few outsiders had ever received, and with it came a vow of lifelong protection. Overwhelmed, Thomas felt tears sting his eyes, something he had not allowed himself in years, not since losing his wife and child to illness, a grief that had pushed him into solitude, convincing him that the world had nothing left to offer but pain. But standing before 300 warriors who honored him for nothing more than kindness, he felt a warmth spread through him, thawing a part of his soul he thought forever frozen. The girl stepped closer and pressed the turquoise pendant into his hand, her most treasured belonging, the chief explained, given only to those who had saved a life. Thomas tried to refuse, but she insisted, saying in halting English, "You gave me life. I give you my heart's stone." The simplicity of her words hit him harder than any blow, and Thomas felt a swell of humility so great it nearly brought him to his knees. In that moment he realized that the world's divisions, race, fear, land, history, meant nothing when one human being chose to see another simply as a person in need. As the sun climbed the sky, the warriors mounted their horses again, but before leaving, the chief placed a hand on Thomas's shoulder and said, "Kindness echoes farther than the mountains. One day, when you need us, that echo will return." And then they rode away, their silhouettes merging with the rising sun until they looked like spirits fading into the horizon, leaving Thomas standing alone on his porch, surrounded by the gifts of a people he had been raised to fear but had come to admire in a single, life-changing morning. In the days that followed, word spread across towns and settlements, some reacting with disbelief, others with awe, but none could deny the truth that a simple act, offering water to a thirsty child, had bridged a chasm that history had carved deep, and Thomas found himself changed not only by the gratitude he had received but by the realization that kindness, no matter how small, carries the power to heal wounds that generations of conflict had failed to mend. He began fixing up his ranch not as a place of solitude but as a place of welcome, where anyone, settler or tribe, could find a drink of water, a moment of rest, and a reminder that humanity is strongest when compassion leads the way. Years later, when drought struck the region and Thomas's well nearly dried, the Apache tribe returned just as the chief had promised, and together they dug a new well where underground springs flowed strong, blessing his land so it would never go thirsty again. And as Thomas stood beside them, older now but wiser, he realized that kindness had given him something far greater than allies. It had given him a family, a purpose, and proof that one good deed can ripple outward, turning strangers into friends and fear into understanding. And so the man who once lived alone became a symbol in the valley of what humanity could be when compassion overcame division, and travelers passing through would often hear the legendary story whispered around evening fires, the story of a rancher who offered water to a thirsty Apache girl and awoke to 300 warriors, not to take his life, but to honor it, an unforgettable reminder that the smallest gesture of kindness can awaken the greatest forces of goodwill, capable of changing lives, healing hearts, and reminding the world that hope grows wherever a hand is extended in compassion.